Welcome to this segment of the M272 and M273 engine videos regarding assembly and camshaft timing procedures. The procedures discussed here should be considered as supplemental to those outlined in the WIS job related to removing and replacing the balance shaft. Please note that the video includes several steps that are not actually required for the task of replacing a balance shaft. Also, the use of an impact gun is for demonstration purposes only. All fasteners should be reinstalled using hand tools. Always follow proper torque procedures during assembly. Here, we can see the difference between a good balance shaft gear and a badly worn balance shaft gear. It's important to note that when replacing a balance shaft, you must replace the counterweights and the screw also. We'll begin reassembly by carefully inserting a new balance shaft and attaching the counterweight. Once again, be careful. The counterweight is keyed and fits in only one position. In order to lock the balance shaft in the 0 position, we'll use a suitable tool to lock it from the back. On the front of the balance shaft, there's a little notch. It should line up with the mark on the block, as you can see. The timing chain has 4 copper links, which we're going to use to help us in setting the basic timing. They're spaced exactly the same distance from each other, so none is special. You can start at any position. There are a total of 3 rails that we need to install on the engine at this point. The 4th rail is the one that we pulled out when we were removing the cylinder head. The easy way to recognize which way the rails fit is to refer to the little dimples that you can see in several locations. These recesses are made to fit on the studs in the block. The longest rail will go there. The rail with the notch will go on the other side, and the notch will point toward the inside. For the last one, the dimple will go in the stud. We have installed the rails, and as you can see, the left and right side look symmetrical because they're installed correctly. If you install them incorrectly, you should immediately see that the rails will not fit. Once again, make sure that the recess goes toward the block. This is the crankshaft chain gear, on which you'll notice the little notch where the plastic is connected. That is exactly 180 degrees from the alignment pin on the crankshaft. And we'll use this point during the basic engine timing procedure. Also, notice on the balance shaft that there are 3 little notches. We'll also use those to time the engine. Now we can put the chain on the crank gear and the balance shaft gear. Please notice the chain routing outside, inside, and inside of this one. Place the copper links on the crankshaft gear on the aforementioned plastic mark. Down here on the balance shaft gear, you can see that the copper link is again on the 3 little notches. Before we install the front timing cover, we must install the oil pump. When applying silicone sealant to the front timing cover, use only a light bead, 1.5 millimeters thick, plus or minus 0.5 millimeters. Please note that the sealant has a shelf life of 12 months. Sealant should be applied no more than 10 minutes prior to installation. Here's a picture of the correct sealant path for the timing case cover. Do not use any more sealant than necessary, and do not put any silicone sealant in the oil drain holes. If silicone gets in the oil, it's possible that it can clog the oil pump and cause engine failure. Once the oil pump is in place, we can put the timing cover on. To help us, we'll use the guide pins, which you can install in the block, one on each side. Once you make sure that all the surfaces are clean and prepped, you can put the timing cover on. This is also a good time to replace the front main seal. To install the timing cover, we'll slide it on the rails and then, while slowly moving the guides out of the way, push the timing cover on. Pay close attention to the chain position so it doesn't get pinched. You should feel no resistance once the timing cover is all the way on. Make sure that the rails are free and that everything looks right. Now we can bolt down the timing cover. Make sure that all the bolts are in, and once they are, torque them all to proper specifications. Now we can install the rear crankshaft cover. As mentioned earlier, this piece must be replaced because it usually gets deformed during removal. The seal is integrated. The rear cover on engine 272 requires sealant to be applied as shown. For engine 273, the sealant path is slightly different. The thickness of the sealant bead is the same for both engines, and you may find that it's easier to apply sealant to the cover than to the crankcase. Don't put any sealant in the counterweight area. The end plate with seal must be carefully inserted so as to avoid rolling the seal. WIS shows a two-part special tool which is to be used. Put the two parts of the tool together and carefully insert through the seal. Then remove the inner tapered tool and place the cover with the remaining tool on the crankshaft flange. Later V8 engines have a larger crankshaft flange and will require the use of a different insertion tool. Always check to be sure the seal is in the correct installation position as shown. Otherwise, oil leakage or premature seal wear will occur. After cleaning and preparing all the surfaces, we can apply a thin bead of silicone to the upper oil pan. The oil pan for engine 272 is sealed as shown here, and the oil pan for engine 273 is sealed like this. There are several versions of oil pan bottom section that can be used depending on vehicle equipment. Here is a drawing that shows sealing details for one version. Install the lower oil pan, making sure all the bolts are in, and then torque them to specifications. Once all the surfaces are cleaned and prepped, we can install the head gasket and the cylinder head. Once the cylinder head is in place the 8 large and 4 smaller cylinder head bolts in their proper locations. Tighten the bolts in the specified sequence, starting from the middle and working to the outside. Once they're all snug, we need to torque them to specifications. Repeat the procedure for the other cylinder head. Now we can install the intake camshaft gear. We'll start with the left side. As you can see, the pulse wheel is off and the gear has L stamped on it. Also notice on the back of the gear there's a pin and a line that corresponds to the location of the pin. This pin must be lined up with the hole in the camshaft, which is represented by this little dimple. The way we're going to install the chain is by locating the copper link on the chain, and then we'll install the gear so that the copper link lines up with the letter L on the gear. Once we have that, we can install the gear on the camshaft by rotating the camshaft until the gear falls in place. Never spin the engine. Only spin the camshaft by using a torque socket on the back side of the camshaft. We can now install the right side intake camshaft gear. As you can see, this has R stamped on it, and also on this particular gear there's an arrow on the front side of the R. Some gears have it, and some do not. If the arrow isn't there, always use the front side of the R to line it up with the last of the copper links that we're using to time the engine. Once the chain is on, we will again line up the dimple on the camshaft with the pin. There should be no force needed when putting the gear on the camshaft. If the gear doesn't want to go on, something isn't right. At this point, we can put the harmonic balancer back on. Verify the 40 degrees after top dead center position of the crankshaft. Make sure that our line and marks are in line with the camshaft cover here and on this side. On the right-hand side, you may notice that the timing looks a little off. However, if you remove all the slack, the marks should line up. The slack will be taken up by the timing chain tensioner later. When we take out all the slack on this end, it should be easier to insert the last timing rail. We can use the pin to hold this rail right now. Insert all 4 pins, but don't push them in all the way. We'll save that step for later after we make sure that the engine is fully timed. In order for us to gain access and to spin the exhaust camshaft, we must remove the centrifugal oil separator on the right-hand side. Please note that the bolt is E8 and has left-hand threads. Once we take that off, we can insert the tool at the rear and spin the camshaft. The same applies on the other side, except we don't have to take any other steps. We can now install the exhaust camshaft gears. We're going to start with the left side. Notice the 2 marks. These 2 marks need to line up with this single line on the intake camshaft. we are still not completely in. As mentioned earlier, this is a two-piece gear. We must rotate the camshaft and make sure that the gear is fully seated onto the camshaft. You should feel a slight movement at the end, which lets you know that it's all the way on.
You're going to have to move it just a little bit. Just jiggle it.
We're going to repeat the procedure on the right side, again aligning the two marks on the exhaust camshaft gear with a single dot, in this case on the intake camshaft gear. Once we're on, we can rotate the camshaft in order for the pin to fall into the gear. Once again, we need to make sure that the gear is fully seated. And then we can remove the pin. Now that we have the timing gears on, we can put the cam covers on. Please note that on a 272 or 273 engine, the cam covers contain the bearing surfaces. They should be treated very carefully. If the cam cover is damaged, the head has to be replaced because they're a matched set from the factory. On this unprepared surface, you can see the silicone outline. Please note that there is no silicone near the oil holes. There is silicone around the spark plug openings and on the outline. When sealing the cylinder head covers, please refer to Service Bulletin SB0 1.20/32. For engines 272 and 273, the sealant bead thickness is 1 mm plus or minus 0.2 mm. This is the smallest bead and closest tolerance value that we've seen so far. For engine 272, the sealant is applied as shown. And for engine 273, it should look like this. Overdoing the silicone can clog the oil holes, cause engine noise, and possibly mechanical damage. Once again, on the right cylinder head, use a very limited amount of silicone. These passages must remain open.
Mr. Folkayene from Quality Engineering Center will show you the proper procedure of applying silicone bead to the cylinder head. As you can see, the bead has to be very thin, between 0.8 and 1.2 mm. And all you do is run a steady bead along the perimeter. When working close to the bearing surfaces, pay particular attention. No silicone should ever go in between the camshaft and the head. Once completed, the head surface should look like this. Once silicone is applied, the surfaces should be put together within 15 minutes.
Once we have all the surfaces cleaned and prepped, we can install the camshaft covers. But first, don't forget to lubricate the camshaft bearings with oil. Insert the bolts and then observe the tightening sequence precisely. Once again, this is very important because over-torquing the bolts can cause camshaft failure. Once we have all the bolts snugged down, we'll torque them to the specified torque. This will be repeated on the other side. It's now time to install the pulse wheels. Pulse wheels must always be replaced. That's because the locating pin can shear off the second time you use it. Once you get the new pulse wheels, make sure that you have one of each marked with letters ER, AR, AL, and EL. AL stands for Aus gas links, which is exhaust left. When correctly installed, with the engine at 0 position, these two marks should be in line with holes in the cam covers. Once again, the marks should match. Once again, don't forget that exhaust camshaft bolts use left-hand threads. If you feel resistance, please stop. Something isn't right. Damage to the camshaft and/or cam gear and/or bolts can occur. Once we're confident that the bolts are fully seated, we can torque them to specification while holding the camshaft at the rear. Please note that you should only spin the engine while the camshaft covers are on and torqued down. The camshaft holders under the camshaft covers are not designed to take the stresses that occur when the engine is rotated. Like the cam covers, the sealant bead for the front cylinder head covers is specified as 1 millimeter thick. The tolerance, however, is different. Rather than a plus or minus value, it's simply plus 0.5 millimeters. Once you're confident that the camshaft covers are correctly mounted, the chain tensioner can be installed. Remember, the chain tensioner cannot be installed or released unless the camshaft covers are installed. If the chain tensioner is of the earlier design, it can be reset as described in WIS. However, the later version cannot be reset, so it must always be discarded. There's a specific procedure that must be followed in order to release the tensioner. Counterhold the left exhaust camshaft at the rear with a torque socket while turning the crankshaft about 5 degrees against the direction of engine rotation. Apply 70 Newton meters on the crankshaft. The unlocking is finished by turning the crankshaft in the direction of engine rotation for 90 degrees or 1/4 turn. Now make 2 full revolutions and verify the timing one last time. Once we're confident that the timing is correct, we can install the oil separator cover, rear camshaft cap, and the front camshaft covers. The front camshaft covers must be cleaned and prepped and the proper size bead of sealant applied. We can use the same tool that we used for removal of the pins to push them back in and fully seat them in the cylinder head. Now we can finish the front of the engine by installing the oil filter housing, belt tensioner, thermostat housing, and idlers. Please replace the seal on the oil filter housing. We'll now verify the timing using a different set of timing marks. You can also use this procedure to check the basic timing without disassembling any of the components. Remove the camshaft position sensors from the left and right side. Turn the crankshaft until the 305-degree mark on the belt pulley lines up with the mark on the timing case cover. The button should be fully visible in the windows as shown. If, however, you set the crankshaft at 305 degrees and see that the camshaft button on one side looks okay, but the other side is not centered, then you can be sure that the timing is not correct. We can now finish up the installation of the parts on top of the cylinder head, including the switchover valve arm, the heat shield, if equipped, ignition coils, air filter housing mount, and the dipstick tube. It's now time to install the intake manifold. Please note that you should always replace intake manifold gaskets. Before putting the manifold down, you must make sure that the NOx sensors are plugged in. Now we can gently lay the manifold down. Once you're sure that all the cables are free and that nothing got stuck under the manifold, you can go ahead and bolt it down. Since most of the components on this engine are made of aluminum or magnesium alloy, correct torque is absolutely crucial. Incorrect torque can cause warpage and air leaks. We can now plug in all the electrical components we've disconnected in the initial steps. Pay particular attention to the two grounds, one on each side, here and here. These are the ignition coil grounds. Leaving these loose will cause serious electrical problems and possibly component failure. It's also important to torque them to their specifications.
You can also finish installing any hardware you took off the initial steps.
The last component we have to install in the engine is the air pump and switchover valve assembly. If you remember from the previous video, we removed this as an assembly, so we're going to install it the same way. Vacuum hoses on the back side must go over the timing cover. One vacuum hose that you have to plug in goes here. We have 2 bolts for the switchover valve, 3 on the air pump assembly, and another 3 on the switchover valve. We've just covered some of the assembly techniques used on engines 272 and 273. We hope you found this segment informative. Thanks for watching. Please make another selection to learn more about working with these engines.